We start the live stream. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Cabinet. In addition to the Cabinet members and other councillors present in the room, we also have some councillors joining our meeting remotely, and those include the Cabinet members, Councillors Harvey, Davis and Tyler, possibly. Councillor Tyler, are you with us?
No, apologies from Councillor Tyler.
Councillor Tyler sends her apologies. Cabinet support members, we have apologies from Councillors Bartlett, Hardwick and Watson. Councillor Hay, are you with us? No. Councillor Selden. Councillor Jindler. No. Okay. So group leaders or their representatives and scrutiny chairs. Councillor James. Councillor James. Yes.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Lester.
Yes, present as well.
Thank you. Councillor Matthews. Seeing you, Councillor Matthews.
Yeah, I'm your chair.
Thank you. Councillor Fagan.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair.
Councillor Fagan and Councillor Wilding.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'm here.
And then of particular relevance today, we have the two scrutiny chairs, Councillor Howells.
Yes, I'm here, Chairman. Thank you.
And Councillor Swinglehurst.
Good afternoon, Chairman.
Thank you. And of course, Councillor Lester has two hats on today. We also have a number of officers attending who will be introduced as they call upon. The Chief Executive sends his apologies. I'll now formally open the meeting. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum. Microphones should be muted when you're not speaking. Please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meetings, provided that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. As we move through the agenda, in addition to discussion by Cabinet members, I will invite group leaders or their representatives in turn to provide views and questions from their group on each item. Where appropriate, I will also call on scrutiny chairpersons to comment on behalf of their committee. Voting will be undertaken by a show of hands in the room. Only Cabinet members may vote. The first item is apologies for absence. We have noted those. I don't know if there are any additional ones.
None that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Declaration of interest. Are there any Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or other interest for items on the agenda today? I see none. Minutes.
Leader, sorry to interrupt. It's Councillor Davis. Just to make you aware, I've joined the meeting, so I'm not giving apologies for this one.
Thank you. So item 3, minutes to approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on 16th of September 2021. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Cabinet members, are you content the minutes are an accurate record? All those in favour? Thank you. The next item is to receive any questions from members of the public. We have none. And item 5 is to receive any questions from councillors, and we have none from councillors either. All saving your fire for the full council meeting, I'm sure. Item 6, revision of capital programme budget for priority floodworks. This is to consider recommendations from the General Scrutiny Committee regarding the proposed capital programme realignment and recommend to council in-year adjustments to the capital programme to allow the realignment of capital spend to priority flood projects that require this reallocation. Begins on page 19 of the agenda pack, and a supplementary paper has been published today, which sets out the recommendations from the Scrutiny Committee and the Executive's response to those recommendations. I'll pass, if I may, to Councillor Harrington to introduce this item. I trust we have Neil Taylor on on Zoom.
Thank you, Leader. This is relatively straightforward in a sense. We obviously went to full council in August of last year to borrow the £4 million that we needed to repair the damage done by Storm Dennis. We allocated originally 2.5 million approximately for the 2 failures at Foundhope, one at Letchmere Ley, one at Stone Cottage. Stone Cottage, if you remember, was the wall, and Letchmere Ley was the landslip. We've come in at considerably under what the estimation was for the landslip at Letchmere Ley. That ended up costing £500,000 rather than 1.5 that was originally forecast. The wall collapse at Stone Cottage has come in slightly over, and so we need to make adjustments to that and put the remainder of the budget into the pot that's going to deal with the remaining sites, including Whitney and Wye failure. We took this to scrutiny, as you say. We've had some very sensible recommendations, which we are going to agree to and adopt. A lot of those centre around how we can make more accurate estimations. It's always very difficult in these situations when you're trying to apply for capital funding to do repair works to understand precisely what those costs are going to be. They often go over. We've got an occasion here where it's come in quite under, and one where it's gone over slightly. One of the recommendations that came from Scrutiny, which follows somewhat in line with our thinking, is that we need to get better understanding of better resource probably within the council is the best way of describing that, to better understand when we have a capital budget bid, what that's going to be. So in a sense, some of our own technical expertise back within the council. So we need to be looking at how we would fund that in revenue. And the final recommendation from Scrutiny was that we have a lessons learned experience out of this, which is absolutely agreed. And I think that also runs alongside the independent review, which we commissioned, which is running at the moment, which should be able to give us quite a lot of knowledge and best practice going forward. So there we go. I don't know if anyone else needs to say anything from our side. That's
Do you have any questions at the moment? Councillor Harvey, have your hand raised virtually.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Leader. I'm glad that we've managed to get the response for scrutiny into the meeting today, so that we can have a look at it alongside the report. And I'd like to thank Scrutiny for the time that they took to consider this, so that we could keep on a timeline to get to full council. I think there might be a couple of typos in the response document that we've got. If we're going to meet the timeline for publishing this with the council papers, I think for recommendation 1, the time frame for providing the detailed costs should be 30th of September and not 30th of October. Because we need to publish the council papers quite quickly. Also, for recommendation 3, it doesn't look like we've got any timescales in there at all for completing the works. So, if officers could suggest what those should be, that would be helpful. And as Cabinet Member for Finance, I'm slightly concerned that it may be possible to misinterpret or maybe correctly interpret, depending on what the intention was from Scrutiny, the recommendation and the response the response that we've given to recommendation B. Which is talking about moving forward with strategic projects. Greater emphasis should move to revenue funding more detailed design phases to ensure greater confidence can be given to allocating capital funding. I am wholly in favour of there being greater confidence in understanding what we are committing to in terms of capital costs. However, we already have in the approved capital programme £250,000 which is for a capital development fund, recognising that in some instances, not all instances, but in some instances, a significant amount of upfront work needs to be done in order to get a business case in a fit state to be approved to go onto the programme. And our experience over the last 2.5 years, and maybe Councillor Lester can bring some experience from the previous administration, but certainly over the last 2.5 years, what we have found is that projects that we're keen to get onto the capital programme have moved very slowly in terms of bringing business cases forward, because the service areas have struggled to find the headroom, both in terms of staff and in terms of slack in their ever tightening revenue programmes, to be able to fund that preparatory work. So whilst I absolutely agree that we need to be much clearer when we do get a business case to the point of approval as to what it is we're actually committing ourselves to in terms of costs, the practicality of doing that is that sometimes it will be necessary to part fund some of the upfront work where it is capable of being capitalised. And I do recognise that it's also the case that not all of the preparatory work can ever be capitalised. But we do have that funding line there, and it is precisely to try and unblock some of the problems that we have in bringing forward important pieces of work to enter the capital programme. So if everybody is content that there is an understanding as to what is meant, that in the majority of cases revenue funding is used to develop business cases, but it's not exclusively used, and that there may be occasions when capital funding is used, then I'm happy for the wording to stay. But if the suggestion from Scrutiny is that it is only revenue funding that is ever used, then I think I need to bring to the attention of the room that has its own problems with it, and we've already agreed a workaround for that, which goes against agreeing entirely with the recommendation from Scrutiny. So we could just agree it in part.
Mr. Taylor, I wonder, could you comment on the first comment from Councillor Hardy, which is about the date of the 30th of October? Is that an error?
No. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes. We can.
No, if you look at the answer, the recommendation is accepted in part. We are producing the detailed financials for full council, but not this full council. The deadline of 30th October was to bring a report forward that can go to full council on the final outturn cost of the project, which is why it was accepted in part.
So this realignment of the capital budget will not go to the council meeting on the 8th of October, but to one in November.
Yeah, no, the realignment of the capital budget is going to this full council at 8th of October. A detailed report on the final outturn costs in detail breakdown will go to the next full council.
Okay, is that satisfactory, Councillor Hartley?
Well, Leader, it's satisfactory in terms of explaining the sequencing here. However, we will be taking this report to council next week without actually sharing that detail. But I do support that it's important that we get these budgets properly aligned in terms of our correct understanding of how, well, our current understanding of how the money's going to sit. But I don't imagine that that's what was intended when the recommendation was made by Scrutiny.
So I'll leave that to Councillor Lester's comments on when he comments. He can have a view on whether he's satisfied with that proposal or something else. And then the second question, I think, is probably for Mr. Lovegrove. This is about whether money which comes out of the income, add to our income.
Apologies, could you turn your mic on? We're struggling to hear you.
Yeah, my mic is on. Yeah. Oops, sorry. There we go. So this second question is about whether the funding running up to projects comes out of capital or income. That's from a commercial perspective. I'm quite familiar with the idea that once the project is actually up and running, there might be a transfer into the capital budget. I think Councillor Harwood pointed we want to retain that flexibility. I wonder whether you'd like to comment on that.
Thank you. I agree that we need to keep both options open, and as Councillor Harvey said, that we need to be clear in our response that there were some projects will fund from revenue, some will fund from capital pot. There'll be some that we fund from both, and I think we need to keep all the flexibility options open available to the council as we develop our project.
I'm just looking at the paper to see whether we need to make any adjustments to the recommendation as a result of those two. Yeah, we might have to make an adjustment to recommendation A. Councillor Harrington.
So just in relation to recommendation B, for me that reads as a suggestion, not an outright order or requirement, that we look at, in a sense, building up our revenue capacity so that we have the ability to understand capital projects that are being brought forward either by us or by our partners. And that's something that we are doing, or we are looking to do, and we have already done that to some extent. So I don't see really the conflict there myself. But I may be misreading that. Perhaps Councillor Lester, when he gets a chance, will be able to give us some clarity.
Right, shall I move on then? I see no other hands raised. So perhaps Councillor Lester, you might want to start off, if you would, in your capacity as scrutiny chair to.
Yes, thank you. I think it was really good that this matter was brought before scrutiny, and it was sprung on us last minute. But I think it was really good because it gave us the opportunity to look at this. And as a result of looking at it, the first recommendation really was spawned out of a need to just have a breakdown of the figures so we knew exactly what it is that was being paid for. So if the figures aren't forthcoming for the full council, so be it. But it was just, okay, so we've spent all this money, but just looking at a couple of figures didn't go into what the scrutiny committee felt was enough detail just to be understanding of what cost what. And the discussion generated the fact that, some costs won't be borne by the council, but some were, but more detail would be beneficial. But the problem with the meeting is that we fell into the trap, and Mr. Taylor set us straight, we fell into the trap of talking about overspends and underspends, when in actual fact, it was a decision needed to be made with a capital, from a capital side of things, without necessarily knowing the full details of the cost of things. And so it makes it sound like there's been an overspend and an underspend, but it was a truer understanding of the financial costs later on down the line, which enabled everyone to understand the true cost of something. And if I remember, I'm trying not to put words in Mr. Taylor's mouth, but Mr. Taylor was there explaining the problems with having to react and get a sum quickly to cover the cost of things without having had the opportunity to do an in-detailed cost of what really needed to be done. And that could only be done later on. And then this expenditure now explains meets in more detail what those actual costs really, really were. And so it led on to the second recommendation, which is just an acknowledgement that if you have to do a ballpark figure, you're always in danger of looking like you're underspending or overspending. And so it was Mr. Taylor's attempt to say, well, you know, perhaps we can do a more, don't put pressure on overall budgets until you've fully understood the real cost of things. And just to give that breathing space when you're allocating capital funding to say, well, you know, this is the ballpark figure, but there'll be more detail later on. And so that was what the recommendation was trying to address. And I looked to Mr. Taylor just for clarity on that. But that's what I think the second recommendation was trying to nail down. Now, if the wording of that is clunky or has led to some confusion, then we can relook at that. But that's as I understand it. And I looked to Mr. Taylor for his comment.
Yes,
Okay.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes, I'll come back. Everyone keeps calling me Mr. Taylor. It's a bit weird. So if I just explain the issue really is that in order to spend capital money on developing a project, you need to have it in the capital program. So the first question is, how much is it going to cost? So you get, as we've done with these flood schemes, you get a guesstimate of what, and it very clearly said in the full council report that the individual projects were estimates. If you, in the normal course of events, it would be better to develop the project first and then come back with some detailed costings that are reasonably accurate. And then we won't have this underspend, overspend business. The trouble is, if you were going to spend capital on that, that's fine. But if the project doesn't go ahead, or it's a project that doesn't result in an asset, it then falls back to the service as a revenue burden because it is genuinely revenue. So the thinking in other councils is they have a revolving revenue project development pot. You use that revenue to develop the project, you get the right cost, you put it in the capital program, you then capitalise the development costs back, and the revenue goes back in the revolving pot and it develops another project. And that is basically what we were talking about at Scrutiny.
Mr. Ludgrove, I don't really want to comment on that. I think that's what we do. We have a pot of £200,000 designed to stimulate these projects coming forward.
And we have a number of pots that we have in our budget. So we have the £1 million a year in the capital programme, and there are various revenue budgets that sit in the various departments and directorates. So we do that, and we probably don't match it in quite the way as visible as Neil Taylor's been trying to learn on that for the next budget round.
Yes, I think that's the action, isn't it? Consider and funding development of capital projects. And it's done by 31st of March 2022, which is the next budget year. So I think, subject to what anybody else, I think we can live with recommendation B and the response. Recommendation now, so the concern says the report to council will include a breakdown. So it's not this report that's coming up that's going to contain a breakdown. It's going to be a separate report to council. And I don't know, is that the appropriate route for it to go to the full council with that breakdown, or could that breakdown be provided perhaps to the scrutiny committee? Would that be a more appropriate route? Just looking around the room to see if anybody's got a particular view on that. Councillor Lester, do you want to go to full council?
Well, thank you. I mean, I just think what's at the heart of this is just making sure that everybody knows exactly what's been spent on what. Nobody doubts for 1 minute that the work's needed to be done. It's just when you present ballpark figures to a scrutiny committee, obviously they want to look deeper and just know exactly what was costing what, especially when, as presented, it looked like something that was forecast to be a lot more suddenly wasn't, and then something that was forecast to not be so much suddenly becomes something else. But I think we've covered that ground in saying that, you know, these were ballpark figures and greater detail was being understood when the projects had got the capital go ahead. So whether it comes to this council or next council, you may well get the question at full council. But I think if members know, well, Scrutiny's picked this up and we're going to get a breakdown of the costs in November or whenever it will be, that will probably answer the question.
I suppose the possibility to go to the full council, we have questions from 53 councillors asking detail, whether Scrutiny would feel it can take responsibility for asking those questions, and then if you don't get satisfactory responses, then there is a facility within Scrutiny for members to ask questions if they wish to. So I think I'd like to amend the executive response saying that the report will go back to the Scrutiny Committee to include a breakdown of the scheme costs, if that is acceptable. Thank you. That was a little bit longer than we expected. Councillor Lester, do you want to talk on this on behalf of your position as group leader?
Well, just to make the one point, and it wasn't a point that the Conservatives made, it was one of the Scrutiny members made, and it was just a point to have an understanding that once this work is done, who will quality control the works and make sure that they're done to the satisfaction of the council. Obviously, that falls to Balfour Beatty, but the question was, well, do we have anybody else in the council who would just make themselves satisfied rather in practice, rather than on a spreadsheet, that the works were done to the satisfaction of the council? And so that didn't work its way into a recommendation, but certainly from a group leader's point of view, I would see some merit in that approach.
Thank you. I'll ask Councillor Harrington to respond to that when we come to the end of this. Councillor Matthews.
Leader.
I'm sorry, that's the question. Yes.
Mr. Taylor has raised his hand.
I'm sorry, Councillor.
Mr. Taylor has raised his hand.
I think again I'll take his comment at the end. Yeah.
Am I coming in now or?
You are, Councillor Matthews. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I can understand Councillor Harvey raising the issue because in their position and responsibility, it'd be nice to know, have a more detailed breakdown of where we're going to and the fact that it's coming to cabinet. So I can understand her and the Scrutiny raising those issues. But I can see there's no change to the programme budget generally. So we have no real problems with it. I would like to ask Councillor Harrington, I know he mentions it in a few places in the report, the Whitney road just by the toll bridge, that's been going on for far too long. And I know that he very kindly attended the local Parish Council meeting a fortnight ago. I thank him for that. But can he give us some idea of, I know you're out for tenders and goodness knows what, can you give us some idea when that work might be started? Because it is an A-class road and carries an awful lot of traffic. So could you tell us, Councillor Harrington, when that work is likely to commence?
Councillor Matthews, again, I'll ask Councillor Harrington to deal with that at the end, if I may. Do you have any other questions, Councillor Matthews?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Fagan.
Thank you, Chair. I don't actually have any questions about it. I'm just only a comment just to say that it is confusing, I think, for general members of the public to sort of understand this switch between capital and revenue. And, ultimately the work needed to be done. I think it's important that we learn from this project, because potentially we will have more incidents like this as climate change really hits us. So developing resilience in all our structures within local government is going to be helpful. And again, it's just a shame that the council had to actually fund these works, because the Belwyn scheme didn't actually provide the funding for all these repairs. Thank you.
Yes, that's a very fair point about Belwyn. I think we need to be lobbying the central government to look at that. Moving on then to Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Leader. So as a member of the General Scrutiny, I'll just say I'm happy with what's been discussed today. Getting on to what the independents for Herefordshire think, Well, we're happy with the fact that the scheme's been finished. That's great. And more than that, very happy that Councillor Harrington and the coalition have made some vital improvements so that in future projects such of this are handled by a dedicated project management team. And we welcome the experience and the clear direction that obviously Neil Taylor, or Mr. Taylor as he seems to be called now, brings to the council. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley. Councillor James.
Thank you. Can I assure you that there won't be 53 questions at the next council meeting on this matter, being more of a technical matter than a political matter. I do caution against the use of revenue, especially in the current climate, using revenue for capital projects, but I know it's necessary at certain times, especially in these times of low interest rates. It makes bad sense. And I would echo what Councillor Matthews said about the Whitney road scheme as far as flooding is concerned, which causes great havoc several times in the last year or so when traffic has to be diverted from that major road from South Wales to the Midlands, which carries an enormous amount of traffic, being diverted through many of the minor roads on the north of the county, which causes a great deal of problems.
Thank you, Councillor James. So, Councillor Harrington, a couple of questions there. First of all, the monitoring. Councillor Lester was asking about that.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I mean, we have a contractual arrangement at the moment with Balfour Beatty to do our inspections, and they happen to do the capital work here as well, and they were the subcontractor who subcontracted on. We're looking to move to a different way of monitoring the work that's done, but in the meantime, we have to accept that our contractors are doing their work. We have people who check on that, but we don't necessarily go out and check technically because we don't have that facility within the council at the moment because of the way that the contracts have been set up. The public realm contract was set up and has been set up since 2013. But we have been provided with updates on the post-work situation, and there are obviously consequences if there is any failure of those. But a broader point is that we should, which comes back to the point I made earlier, is that we will be bringing more technical staff back in-house. We'll have the ability to check things in a way that is perhaps give them some more assurance, or give Scrutiny some more assurance. In relation to the Whitney on Wye works, thank you, Councillor Matthews. Yes, I went to speak on Councillor Graham Jones's request with Burdesley Parish Council, which includes Whitney and also members from Briley came. I think it also includes Kindersley, sorry, as well. Members from Briley came, members also came from across the border because this is a route that's vitally important, as Councillor James has said, to connectivity. We have split the work up. There are 66 sites that have been tendered for, which exclude Whitney. Those tenders are back now. We're reviewing them. We'll have some announcements soon on who will be getting that work and when that work will start. In relation to Whitney, we have Balfour Beatty doing the investigation and design work because it's a complicated, investigation and design in a sense that it requires more certainty before you tender. We then hope to be going to tender shortly on that. In reality, because of the restrictions that the EA put on working in the river courses, the reality is that we probably won't be able to actually start on site in terms of rebuilding until spring, possibly summer. The greatest important thing that the thing of most importance and the thing that we're insisting on is that we do not have a road closure. So we're looking at the recommendations that have come back in terms of design, and we are giving direction clearly within reasonable bounds of economics that we want the road kept open, and we are starting to identify the right solution that will allow that to happen. And that the view of all the councillors in the room, including those from across the border, were that they understood the restrictions, they understood the difficulties we were under, the lack of funding from central government, but that if we could keep the road open, that would be the thing that they would in a sense, most struggle with, and that's our intention.
Thank you, Councillor Harrington. Neil, do you want to comment?
Yes, just some information that I haven't actually shared with Councillor Harrington yet, unfortunately. As part of the 67 small works flood repair schemes, which we're not using Balfour Beatty for, we've been out to tender, and as part of that, it needs to be managed, supervised and quality controlled by ourselves. So we've hired ourselves a clerk of works, which is basically the trade name for a quality assurance inspector. We do have the option to use that clerk of works on things like Whitney on Wye to keep an eye on the quality while that person is here doing the 67 sites. So we do have the facility to keep an eye on quality. And I apologise to Councillor Harrington, but I haven't got to him with that bit of information just yet.
Neil, that's excellent news. Something we've been pressing for some time. If we can get that skill within the council, I'm sure it'll produce value for us over a period. Thank you for that. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, it was just to carry on with what Neil Taylor was saying. So the value for money assessment that we did 18 months ago identified issues with commissioning, procurement and quality, and we have 2 full-time positions at the moment who are working through that and how we look at quality and checking on it. So all of the things that we're asking for are being dealt with, and I'm really pleased to hear from Neil that we have somebody that we are able to call on specifically on the Whitney on Wye. So well done for getting that sorted, Neil. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll go to the recommendation. So slightly different from in the published papers. First, the recommendation that the executive response to the recommendations of the General Scrutiny Committee at Appendix 1 be approved. Say that in recommendation A, this will be a report to the Scrutiny Committee rather than to full council. I'm sorry, I have a question from.
Sorry, Kate Charlton would like to speak.
Kate, Kate, or Ms. Charlton, Kate.
Leader, I think you're working through it. Sorry, I was just going to say that if there are amendments to the scrutiny recommendations, we need to state clearly what they are at paragraph A. And then for the cabinet report, as you've already mentioned, to approve those recommendations. So that's all it was, but I heard you were already working through them, so I lowered my hand.
Okay, thank you very much. The other 2 recommendations are there as set out. As recommendation B is having regard to the recommendations of the General Scrutiny Committee, Cabinet recommends Council in-year adjustments to capital programme set out in paragraph 11 to allow realignment of capital spend to flood repair projects that require the allocation of budget within the programme of 4.027 million as follows. So pleased to see the Farnhope landslip budget was reduced from 1.565 million to £510,000. The Farnhope retaining wall collapse budget increased from 1 million to 1.15 million, and the unallocated budget resulting, which is 905,000 from the combined budgets, remain as contingency for the remaining flood works. So that's good news. And then item C, the Cabinet member for infrastructure and transport is delegated authority in consultation with the Section 151 officer to realign the Whitney on Wye and the various damage site budgets as costs for those works are confirmed. All those in favour? Thank you very much. Move on then to item 7. This is to update Cabinet on the improvement programme with the Children and Families Directorate following publication of the Ofsted focused visit in July 2021. The purpose to update Council on the outcome of this focused visit and progress to date on the improvement programme. This begins on page 27. Councillor Diana Toynbee will introduce this subject, and the officer present for this item is Charmaine Lawrence. Charmaine, I trust you are with us. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, yes, thank you, Leader. Can you hear me? Okay, thanks. Yes, so I'm sure colleagues are very pleased to be updated on this, on the results of the focus visit and the progress that we're making on the improvement programme. So the recommendations are that Cabinet note the outcome of the Ofsted focus visit in July, and that we note the progress to date against the service priorities identified by Ofsted and other independent reviews undertaken. So there are two separate parts. There's Ofsted and then there's all the other improvements that we're making. And it's good to have Charmaine with us. She is our interim Assistant Director for Safeguarding and Family Support, and she's here to answer questions. I'm just going to mention a few key points in the report. On paragraphs 4 and 5, this is about Ofsted. And it's just a reminder that we are putting together the action plan as we're required to do from Ofsted. And to make the point that all Ofsted's findings were findings that we'd already made ourselves. As you all know, we're doing a lot of extremely thorough reviewing, and everything that Ofsted came up with, we were already aware of. Also, paragraph 12 is important because we've got some actual times on there for the improvement, for our reporting to the improvement board. So our plan, which is ongoing, and I hope that all members have had an opportunity to feed into it. This is going to be taken to the improvement board on October the 11th, which is quite soon. And the strategic and operational plan and an update on improvement will be presented to Cabinet on October the 28th. Moving on to paragraph 15, that repeats the fact that what the Ofsted findings are in line with what we found. Paragraph 25 is important. There are a lot of bullet points here, and this is the point that focuses down on the updates on our progress so far. And very importantly, in my view, focusing on the actual process of when our children work through the legal system and making that much clearer than it has been before. So that's very important. Another of something that I think is particularly important, and I'm sure you will agree with me, is staff morale and retention, and not just that, but opportunities for promotion and career progression for our own permanent people who, throughout this period, which has been one of upheaval, have just continued every single day to work in a really dedicated way for our local families. And I'm really grateful to them. And I'm sure we all agree that we want to do everything we can to support our permanent staff. Part of that is also, as you can see from paragraph 39, moving on with deciding what we're going to do about moving people back into physical offices, because it's often those informal conversations that workers have that are really, really valuable. And finally, right towards the end of the report, paragraph 49 is very important because it's about the legal implications. And as you know, this is an improvement notice from the DfE, and which we have to comply with. So that's a very important part of this review. And the first review with the DfE is scheduled for next month. And finally, I just want to emphasise that this doesn't feel like something that's being done to us by the DfE. It really feels very much like a partnership. Our DfE advisor and other DfE people who we're working with have been extremely supportive, and it's actually a very positive experience. Thank you.
Councillor Tonga, whether you would like Charmaine to make an observation before we go straight.
Sorry, Charmaine, what would you like to add about the report?
Nothing really that I need to add, but I'm happy to take questions because I think you've covered key points, Councillor Toynbee.
Right, so over to any questions from Cabinet members. Charmaine, I'm not sure whether you were in post when this inspection took place. How did you feel it went from, this is all sort of black and white here, what was your overriding impression?
As Councillor Toynbee has pointed out, I'd been in post around 2 months, and nothing that Ofsted had identified had not already been identified, but by the reviews that were already taking place. So there were no surprises. They recognised some strengths as well. Obviously, we've got a very committed permanent workforce, and we've got family support workers doing really good direct work with families. And there was some recognition that there'd been some changes to some of the quality assurance frameworks, and there was the additional staff that started to come in as well to strengthen the capacity and support at the front door. So there were some positive things that came through as well, but like I said, there was nothing in the inspection that we hadn't already picked up within the service. And we're already doing some things to address that. There were already some priority action plans in place addressing the 3 key priority actions that they'd named. There were already actions in place addressing those key areas.
Yeah, Charmaine, I think that's an interesting observation, that this is something which is not really. This is something we've been looking over for some time. I think Councillor Norman had a comment or question.
Yes, a couple of comments, Leader. Thank you very much. First of all, I'm really pleased to hear recognition of our staff, the work they've put in, how difficult this has been for them, and how they've responded in a very cooperative and positive way. Really good to hear that. It's also not news to us that we knew ourselves, and that what has been highlighted by Ofsted was already on our agenda. Clearly, that's very important. We are, recognising our own issues and where we need to address these things. And the third thing I thought was very good to hear from Councillor Toynbee is that the feeling is that the partners are working together. There's no feeling of things being done to them. It's very much a partnership, and much of what is being done is coming from the workforce officers and councillors as well, of course, which is really important.
Councillor Childs.
Thanks very much, Councillor Toynbee, for that introduction, and thank you, Charmaine, for being here. Just a couple of questions, I suppose. I mean, the report talks about, and we've just been talking about here, issues around staff morale. There's a section there about staff retention. It talks about a recruitment and retention strategy. Can you just say more about when that will be kind of finalised and put in place, and any kind of specific elements of that you could elaborate on a wee bit more? And my other question is about the voice of children in care, or in the system. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what changes are in train to ensure that the voice of children is heard more? Because one of the key points from Ofsted's report is about the service having been more sort of parent-led and not sufficiently focused on children's voices. Thanks.
So, in terms of the workforce retention and morale, it is a very difficult time, and we all have to acknowledge that after following the court judgment, it has knocked the confidence and morale of staff, and they have a number of new people coming in that they're not familiar with, and there are a number of changes that are being made. So obviously, on a journey such as this, where improvements need to be made at some pace, it is inevitably difficult for staff. But as an interim team and the permanent senior managers that are around also, we are trying to support staff in the best possible way by listening, by communicating. It's not always necessarily received positively, because some of the things that are being communicated might not necessarily be welcomed. However, our HR colleagues and ourselves are working very closely with the workforce, particularly the permanent workforce, to develop a recruitment and retention strategy. So it's not just about how we're going to get new people into Herefordshire permanently, but it's also about how we're going to support those staff that have been a long time, that have been very dedicated, what will make them stay. And they are having input into developing that workforce strategy. And it's intended that that work will be completed by November. So it's ongoing, and staff are engaged in that process at this moment in time. They can also access, senior leadership, executive leadership. We've got Open Door. We celebrate and recognise the good work that people are doing when that is identified. And what I would say is there will obviously be people that feel disaffected by the changes, but there is also an overwhelming number of people that are feeding back positively about some of the changes that are being made. So it is a priority for us to, support the workforce, to listen, to engage, and to respond appropriately to what they are saying. In terms of the voice of the child, there's been an increase in the number of social workers that are working with children in the children in care teams. There's been some changes made to the way the teams operate. There's been an additional team, all of which allows social workers and social care staff in general to spend more time working directly with children who are looked after by us. There's also developments around the Children in Care Council taking place, and my colleague Andrew's Osai is leading on that. We have a participation officer that we're trying to recruit who will lead on engaging our children in better methods, I suppose, of engaging them and hearing their voices and making sure that their voices are reflected throughout everything that we do, from recruitment to developing policies, and also in the way social workers are working with them. And not just social workers, I always say it's social care staff, because it's not just qualified social workers. I think the fact that there are more people available on the ground allows us to be spending more time with children, listening to them and making sure that their needs are being appropriately met.
Thank you, Charmaine. I will go now to group leaders. I'll start off with Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to get too much into this because the problem we have is long-standing, and I don't want to cause further damage to the morale of staff at the coalface, as it were, who've been very, very poorly served over the last 6 months. I'm afraid it was handled in the early days very badly for reasons which will become apparent before too long publicly, and I don't. Very recent developments have highlighted that, and there was a feeling amongst many of the staff morale was terribly, terribly low. I agree that some managers and staff could no longer be employed by this authority, and it was best that they moved on. But an awful lot of good people have felt very hurt and damaged by the way in which that has been handled. That is quite clear. I hope that there seems to be a realization that, although not publicly acknowledged, that things couldn't go on as they were over the last 6 months. Otherwise, I think we would lose very high proportion of our better staff, as I say, working on the ground. It's a very difficult situation. And to say something publicly that needs to be said, I think would damage the morale of the people working within within the department. I do hope there is a change in the style in which, and there will be a change in the style in which this is being dealt with. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves in a worse position than we already are. Thank you.
Okay, we'll deal with that question perhaps with all the others, if we may. So, Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we, the Herefordshire Independents for Herefordshire, do welcome the report and the changes to the service structure. We hope that these actions will result in a much improved service in the future. I'm a bit disturbed by Councillor James's statement just now, but I think I'll just reserve any comment on that until I hear more about it, but thank you.
Okay, Councillor Matthews.
Thank you, Leader. I'm quite perturbed about this.
Councillor Matthews, I think we've lost you.
Sorry.
Can't hear you.
Oh, come on. You hear me
now? Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm rather perturbed about a lot of the issues raised in this report, particularly the recent Ofsted thing and the 3 points they raised, and the officer said they were aware of that and they were dealing with it. Councillor James and a lot of other councillors will know that myself and others have been raising these same issues for the last 6, 7, 8 years. And the most of that is in those 3 points there. We've been constantly raising and they just haven't been addressed. And it's sad, you know, that these issues are constantly raised by Ofsted and others and they're not being dealt with appropriately. So that's something that causes me considerable concern, and I hope, Leader, that that it'll be properly dealt with on this occasion. The other thing, Leader, is the morale and etc. And then the last issue on that on item 1920, it says the location and accessibility of Hereford, affordable rental and all that are reasons we can't get staff. But the last one there, reputation. Isn't it sad that we've got into such a position that the reputation of this council is now causing us problems to recruit staff? Another issue, Leader, that I've raised constantly, and I know it's easy to sit on the outside and criticize, but we do our best to try and raise the appropriate issues. And you've got on item 31, where it says domestic abuse and all the rest of it. Now, I've been again raising that issue for years and said at that very early stage, we should be nipping that in the bud and dealing with it, not only us, but our partners as well, to prevent it progressing and children coming into care. They should be kept in an home surroundings. That's the way the children should be brought up and cared for. So there's a lot of what I call fairly straightforward things, but we just haven't brought ourselves around to getting a grip of them. So, you know, and I have tried to speak to the director, and I still haven't spoken to her, Leader, so I'll mention it today. I was going to put forward a proposal that if we got 1 or 2 very experienced and highly valued social workers retiring, whether they could be persuaded to come back and work a couple of mornings or a couple of afternoons a week and move in and help somebody who's got a very complex case or something like that, you know, and just use their experience and their value. And I think something like that, if it was taken up, and if those people could be persuaded just to stay on, use their experience and their ability for, as I say, after a couple of afternoons, a couple of mornings, I think that would do an awful lot to try and address the problems. There's an awful lot of work to do, and I know it's difficult, but I genuinely feel that it's high time that members were listened to a little bit, and these issues, what I call straightforward issues, were dealt with once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lester. Councillor Lester, can you hear us? Are you still online? No, I don't see.
Leader, I think he's dropped out. I think he's not playing the best game of musical statues. I think he is stuck.
Councillor Fagan.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I think what this report reveals is that actually children are the ones that have suffered the worst under austerity in Herefordshire, and the fact that actually staff have had to, layers of management have had to disappear, and support services at the very beginning of children's lives have actually been completely disrupted over the past 11 years. And actually this feels like the consequences of that. And you know the sort of culture, changing a culture is not easy, and I think that it will probably get more difficult before it gets we see improvements for children's lives. One of the things that I was pleased to see in the report on paragraph 33, where it was saying that delays in completing pathway plans for young people preparing for adult life, there were delays in those, and the plans were of a poor quality and not informed by the aspirations of the young people, and that changes have been made to this transfer point at 16 plus. And I think that this is absolutely crucial, because young adults really need a lot of support, and especially young adults that have had a difficult time. And if we do not support these young adults and give them good aspirations for the future and help them transition into adult life, we're going to be facing more and more consequences like this in the future. So it's absolutely imperative that we give children a good start right at the very beginning, the support for families right at the very beginning, and then the support for these children that have not had an easy time as they enter adulthood. So I just wanted to raise that point, and that I was glad to see that changes had been made to that transfer point at 16 plus, and that hopefully these children will get better support as they enter adulthood, and there will be better prospects for them because of that. Thank you.
Councillor Howells, you have your hand raised, I think, as Chair of the Scrutiny Committee.
I did, Chair. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Good. I thought it might be worth making a few comments on behalf of Children's Scrutiny. Obviously, this report is really useful in guiding us in the sort of work that we should be looking at. And a few points to make on point 4, for example. We've already recognised through some input by a user that their care portal doesn't really provide the degree of service that that person would have expected. So we're really talking with Charmaine on that being subject of a future meeting of Children's Scrutiny, because I think that's an important way of addressing some of the shortfalls that are recognised under item 4. On item 12, the timings there work pretty well for us. Our next main meeting is on the 12th of October, which is a mainstream meeting, but I think members will know that we've introduced double the number of meetings where they've been every 2 months on mainstream work. What we're doing is slotting in between of those specific improvement panel meetings, ones where we can react pretty quickly to things that come up through the improvement panel that we can address. So the November meeting on the 23rd of November will obviously be a great time to look at the report that's gone to Cabinet as part of the improvement plan issues we'll be looking at. On item 14, I think it's worth adding that as part of a request we've given to Democratic Services for, a new, more comprehensive induction training program, which we recognise we need. A member of members have said it can take you up to 2 years to get really familiar with working children's scrutiny, because it's so complex, and that clearly is far too long for us to be up and running to make sure we can scrutinise and improve matters more effectively. So we're trying to ramp up a more comprehensive and in-depth induction program. We've got a number of headings, and one of those is a more informed scrutiny manual. And I know that John Coleman is working, for example, with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, which is worth noting there's another body we're working there with. And then on item 15, that really supports very much the view we've taken in scrutiny and how we're trying to be innovative in recognising services are very often process-led, in actually looking at scrutiny more from a bottom-up perspective. There's a whole load of challenges on that, but we think that's quite innovative. And one of the bodies we're working with is the Local Government Association for support, training, and indeed mentoring. We've already had several conversations with Claire Burgess, and she's coming to present to our meeting in October about just how we can make use of the local government services to help us address the work we're trying to do. And then if I go further on to the end, I think finally 54, members might like to know, I'm sure, and Cabinet, I'm sure you probably know, but we do have regular weekly updates with the Chief Executive, myself and Councillor Hewitt, Deputy Chair. So we're kept in touch weekly with changes and that we might need to reflect in the work Scrutiny does. Thought that might be quite useful just to make those few points. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hewitt. Councillor Lester, you're back with us.
Yes, apologies for that. My computer just decided to update itself and turn itself off in the process. So don't know why, but sorry about that. Yeah, back with you. No, I was going to, on behalf of our group, I was just going to ask Councillor Toynbee one question that I've raised with her, I know, in the past. It's that there's so much reporting going on, and lots of that is necessary to give confidence to everyone that something is being addressed, root and branch. But there seems to be a lot of reporting going on. Is that a hindrance to officers who are tasked with trying to fix the nuts and bolts of it all? You know, because there's a huge pressure on officers to report back, lots of different groups, bodies, scrutiny, as we've heard, all necessary. But is that reporting right? Because, you know, if you're having to report every second day, then it's getting in the way of the operational stuff that really needs addressing, or other issues that need addressing. And my second question is, on behalf of the group, is that yes, we've heard about the importance of recruitment, and that will always provide a challenge for this service, recruitment. But I understand things are in process, but can we have a realistic date by which we think we will be able to appoint a permanent director for children's services? Because I think that is a really important appointment to have in post to drive this matter forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lester. I think I'd like to, if I may, address the comments made by Councillor James. He said the matters have been handled badly in early days. Things will come to light. I'm just extremely disappointed that a councillor has not brought this to my attention. Why have you waited till now to make comments about this? We're in this together, Councillor James. We need to find solutions. And for you to say you knew there was something wrong a long time ago and you have not brought it to my attention, I'm just extremely disappointed. I don't know whether you've mentioned it to Councillor Toynbee, whether you've mentioned it to the Chief Executive, whether you've mentioned it to the Chair of the Scrutiny Committee. All have open doors, ready to hear your concerns. And now you choose now, after 5 months in public, to make these statements. I'm just, I cannot believe that you have waited this time. You have repeatedly said there have been problems in the council for years. Surely now be open, and you should be coming up with these things, not waiting until a meeting such as this. I don't know what
Chairman, I don't know whether you've been listening. This problem has been going on for years. I've said in continuous councils about the problem. We already have informed us this afternoon that the director has resigned with immediate effect, and we've yet to know why and what the background to that. You know, what we need is some clear leadership from the council, not this prevaricating that has gone on for years and years. And the fact that the morale is so low is an indication of what's been going on, and that's admitted both in the Ofsted report and by the cabinet itself. And the sooner you get a grip of things, the better.
I think I'm more than happy to have a meeting with you and the Chief Executive so we can discuss any concerns you might have in private. That might be the next step forward.
And some detail.
So, Councillor Toynbee, I don't know whether you can want to comment on that or questions from Councillor Lester.
Yes, I've just got a few comments on what colleagues have said. I'm also very disappointed that I often only hear that people have concerns when we're in public meetings, and like you, Leader, and like our Chief Executive, we have repeatedly invited people to contact us for informal chats, and I re-extend that invitation, and I'm very happy to learn from colleagues who've been councillors for longer than me, with some comments that are maybe a bit more detailed than rather sort of generalised criticisms. I do agree with Councillors Matthews and James that the challenges we're facing are very long-standing. They are very long-standing, and that's why it is necessarily a very long and deep process. A lot of work has gone on over the past 6 months, much of it difficult, much of it necessary. And I do think that now, this, as from today, actually, this is the beginning of a new phase. We've had a lot of diagnostics. This slightly relates to what Councillor Lester was saying about people constantly having to report, and I really sympathise with that view. And so I think we are in a new phase now. We've had a lot of diagnostic work, audits, reviews now, and we're moving on to embedding progress, to having a new direction and to really getting everything in place and bringing everybody on board. And that is how it feels. I want to reassure colleagues and staff and members of the public that as far as valuing our staff and retaining our excellent staff is concerned, we don't have to wait till we have a strategy. I know people who know me know that I get very impatient with strategies. I know they're necessary, but we don't have to wait to have a strategy before we contact some of our staff and just have a conversation with them. We don't need a plan or a strategy to do that. And I'm very grateful to the Chief Executive, because he is someone who will just pick up the phone and talk directly to people and listen to people. And that's making a huge difference. So I'm very grateful for that.
There's a question from Councillor Lester about recruitment and what a realistic date might be for finding a permanent point. I know that the Chief Executive is talking to a potential candidate today. It will go. We are trying to encourage as many people, of course, to apply for this role. It's gone out for publication. There will be a shortlist. There will be interviews. The employment panel will be involved in that. The usual testing and talking to groups to work out the best person to have. So that process has to go through. I think we've earmarked October. Starting tomorrow, that we'll be going through all that process, and then probably early November there will be an employment panel meeting, and then it depends on how much notice that individual has to give to their current role. It might be 3 months, in which case we won't be getting a full-time person until obviously February next year. So it would be very nice if it was earlier. We need to make absolutely sure we make a good appointment. We mustn't rush this unnecessarily. But we will get it done as quickly as possible, because I know how much the staff appreciate and need to have a permanent person in this role. I have the hand of Councillor Davis.
Yeah, I just as an observation, and we were talking about training, and I think it maybe relates to scrutiny, especially Councillor Howes, is that I was privileged enough to attend my fostering training because we're on the start of our journey, and how I wish that every single councillor is made to do that fostering training on the day that they become a councillor, because we read about corporate parenting, we read about the stories about young people, we hear about when it goes wrong. Very rarely, of course, do we hear when it goes right. And actually, it was mind-boggling, and it's made me take a step back and go, as a corporate parent, what are we here to do? We're not here to say that a child needs to stay in a home, and if there's domestic abuse, we'll work through all of that. That's not our job role. That's the role of professionals. What our job role is to make sure that we hold officers to account and say that we have the right policies in place to make sure that every child in our care is kept safe from harm. And I think that for me is where we do have maybe something missing with regards to what every single councillor is culpable of, which is that, are we holding officers to account, and are we making sure that we're doing best practice? And I see that as our role, rather than arguing about who did it before, on whose round was it that these things were happening, and of all of the secret information that we have, actually let's all come together and hold them to account and make sure that our children are looked after. So that was just one of the things I wanted to say.
Thank you. I think I'll put this recommendation to the vote, if I may. So the recommendation is that Cabinet note the outcome of the Ofsted focus visit on the 7th to 8th of July, and that the Cabinet note the progress to date against the service priorities identified by Ofsted and other independent reviews undertaken. I put that to the vote. All those in favour of those recommendations? Thank you very much. All in favour? Right, we move on now to item 8, which is portal on the budget and performance report. This is to provide assurance that progress is being made towards delivery of revenue budget and service delivery targets. The reasons for major variances or potential underperformance are understood and are being addressed to the Cabinet's satisfaction. This item begins on page 39 of the agenda pack. And I would ask Councillor Harvey to make an introduction. Officers for this item include Andrew Lovegrove and other directors who may be present. Thank you. So, Councillor Harvey.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And I'm suffering from a cold a bit today, so I'm afraid I've passed the baton to Mr. Lovegrove to do the speaking, but I'm here so that I could do my best to answer any questions.
Mr. Lovegrove.
Thank you, Leader. I'm conscious we produce an awful lot of information here. There's many pages of data and performance information in the pack. As you can see, that we are on target to have a small overspend at 21-22. This is very much a snapshot in time at the end of July, but the implication is that we will arrive at the year end with pretty much a balanced budget. We have had a large number of grants the year for COVID matters. As you can see, they're just under £5 million, and that money has been well spent on dealing with our COVID responses. I'm quite happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So, any questions for Cabinet? Councillor Harrington.
It's not necessarily a question, it's just to highlight that the issue, one of the areas where we've had a shortfall has been in parking because of the effects of the lockdown, especially in January and February. And that we're still only about 83% of the amount of people who have been using car parks. But we have got some grant money, I understand, coming to us, potentially £180,000, Mr. Lovegrove. So I'm hoping that will help to probably cover half the shortfall. And it's just something that we're going to have to keep an eye on and understand. And officers are working on a longer term understanding of patterns and what recovery plans we can put in place there. And yeah, that's just highlighting that.
Any comments from any other individual Cabinet? Councillor Chowns.
It's kind of just a question. Andrew, one of the things that's, well, you know, start with a kind of congratulations really to all of the team. I think that this report kind of really demonstrates that as a council, we are making really strong progress towards better performance management in all of the areas of our operation. And, you know, that's an ongoing kind of journey. One of the areas where we haven't quite got where we want to get to is in management and measurement of performance metrics. There's quite a lot of greyed out stuff here, which basically indicates that we know what it is that we want to measure, but we haven't got the measurements yet. So I'd like to know, it seems to me that that is the next step in really, moving on with this sort of performance management journey that's been such a sort of hallmark of what we're trying to do in transforming the effectiveness of the council. Can you just tell us what steps are in train to make sure that next time we look at a quarterly report, there won't be so much grey?
Yes, I'm having to respond to that. That certainly is the aspiration to be, have no grey in our reports into the future. It is very much a journey, as you say, that we're working our way through systematically through all the various reports and performance measures, agreeing with the individual teams and directorates and understanding exactly what is being dealt with. So there are various teams of officers who are working closely with our colleagues to understand where the performance measures are and with members. So it is a journey, but it is very much a journey where we will get to a point where no grey.
Can I just press you for a little bit more specificity, Andrew? Beyond, we're having conversations with officers, do we have kind of real clarity that we are going to get those metrics nailed down and actually measured? Quite a few of them look like things that we ought to be able to be measuring.
Yes, they are things that we should measure, and there is a balance that we're having to strike about. We're not going to do everything in one go. And all of these things are being done in a phased way, so that the team that is looking at it is having these conversations. So I haven't got the specifics of each individual area, and maybe the directors can comment on the performance measures in their patches.
Okay. Well, advance notice that next time we look at the quarterly report, I'll be counting what percentage of greyed out areas we've managed to remove.
I have given an undertaking to have less grades.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Norman.
Thank you, and certainly echo Ellie's comments about the way this is moving. I just really wanted to applaud adults and health who are really achieving very well indeed. So a forecast underspend, everything taken into account, of 615,000, achievement of a number of projects and following a number of talk community hubs, new talk community websites, initiatives such as Money on Your Mind, Summer Holiday Activity Fund, talk community mental health support, and a range of other things. Not to go into too much detail on these, but I think their achievements do deserve to be mentioned. It's really impressive that they're doing as well as they are in very difficult times.
Yes, thank you for that. Yes, a very good outturn for the first quarter, particularly impressive performance from adults. I'll move now to the group leaders. I'll start off with Councillor Matthews.
I thought you might. You always catch me when I'm unprepared, Thank you, Leader. Actually, I usually thoroughly read reports, but owing to other pressures, I've not gone through this methodically like I like to do. I'd just like to ask Mr. Lovegrove a question, please. Owing to the fact of furlough finishing and inflation flying away and everything else happening, has he changed his view on the pressures that might come before us in the coming months or years in respect of people failing to pay their rates and businesses getting into trouble, etc.? In other words, have recent happenings done anything to change his mind, and what's his view on the situation now?
Thank you, Councillor Matthews. That's quite a big, serious question you've asked me there. In terms of how we're seeing performance of people paying their bills, so the council tax and the business rates, it is very much as we predicted when council set its budget back in February. We are seeing a number of households that are speaking to us about difficulties and challenges, and we're doing everything we can to help them. But we're seeing very much the trend as we predicted, so there are more households that are struggling to pay their bills than pre-COVID, but all the arrangements the council put in place to help them, it seems to be having an impact, and we're working with a lot of the third sector organisations who help people in those situations. So I'm able to report to Cabinet to ask questions, but there's nothing that I'm seeing that is causing me alarm. You've probably seen in the press reporting that the latest furlough system scheme is coming to an end, so we will have to wait and see what happens for people that are in the county that are affected by that. But again, if anybody's listening to this Cabinet meeting, come and talk to us if you think you'll have a problem to pay your bills. We'll do everything we can to help you. There's various schemes that the council's put in place to help people that are in financial difficulties. So come and talk to us, or speak to people such as the third sector, Citizens Advice, Age Concern, those type of organisations where we have a very strong relationship to help people deal with these difficult times. In terms of inflation, if I could predict inflation, then I probably wouldn't be sitting here. And we are seeing some cost pressures. We are seeing some cost savings on there. So it's very much keeping the watching brief on that item. And I think when you're at full council in February setting the budget, there'll be quite a lot of debate around inflation. That's part of what's happening in the world at the moment.
Can you assure us then that our finances are in such a state that you're quite confident that we can weather any reasonable changes in the foreseeable future?
I'm happy to give that assurance that there's nothing in our finances that's given me cause concern or that I need to raise to your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader.
I certainly didn't mean to put you on the spot, Councillor Matthews. I'm just aware we inevitably come up with some difficult questions, so I thought we'd deal with those first. I'll move on now to Councillor Megan, who might have some difficult questions as well. Councillor Megan. Councillor Bacon, shall I move on?
Sorry, Leader, sorry, I misheard you. I thought I misheard you. I don't actually have any difficult questions. I mean, it is reassuring to hear from Mr. Lovegrove that we're not heading into choppy water. And I just also wanted to commend Talk Community for the 24 hubs and the work that Talk Community is doing in our communities in a really difficult time for communities, and it's extraordinary, and I think it's a real achievement. Yeah, well done everybody involved with Talk Community, and also the holiday activity funds for children. I think that made a significant difference to a lot of families throughout the county. Certainly a lot of children who had difficulties throughout lockdowns and were actually able to socialize again, and their parents could actually go to work while their children were being well looked after and had good activities. And I think that it's something that we should continue to support through the county, is how we support families and children during holiday times. Well done on that again. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. Just one to the Director of Finances. Yes, I know, the current situation as far as increased in support to people who are unable to pay their council tax, etc. But we always knew that the crucial crisis point would be when we hit the ending of the furlough scheme. Do you have any other figures available as to the degree of numbers of people on furlough within the county as opposed to the national situation? And the other point I wanted to ask was to Councillor Harrington. Yes, there's a shortfall in the revenue received from car parking in the city, principally the city, but anecdotally, from my observations, I've seen a dramatic improvement in the number of people shopping in the town centre. But with the fact that I'm disappointed the revenue has declined like that, bearing in mind that there's been a substantial increase in the charges that we're making. Car parks, the council car parks, seem to be, as I say, anecdotally, seem to be less full than they used to be, but the city itself seems to be busier. Thank you.
Councillor Harrington, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll try and. So I think Councillor James is saying that anecdotally car parks seem quieter, which is what our statistics are telling us, but the city seems busier. So yes, okay. So I accept that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the point is. I mean, I think more people are perhaps walking into town, cycling into town. Perhaps the active travel measures that we took and people travelling and doing things in a different way, wanting to spend more time in town is making a difference. And I think that long term, that's something that we need to understand, because if we're encouraging more people to do that, we are going to have less car parking, and we need to balance that out. And that's probably something to consider. I can't remember the other point. Sorry, there was another.
The other one was for Mr. Ludgrove. I think it's about furlough and the number of people. We do have all that data, don't we?
We do have the data about the number of people in the county that are furloughed to produce by the government. So I'll make sure that is shared with the cabinet.
Again, Councillor James would love to see it. Yeah. Moving on then, I think to Councillor Lester.
Yes, thank you. I do like the way you change things around because it keeps everyone on their toes. But perhaps if you just stick to the same lineup, it wouldn't confuse some of us. But that's entirely up to you and your style of conducting the meeting. No. I note in there something about the 106 monies that are sat there, and I've been, and I know other Conservative colleagues of mine have been really frustrated about the fact that the 106 monies are sat there, but nothing's happening in order to have that money spent. I now know, because I was told recently, but it's also in the report, that a decision is coming to November Cabinet to make that decision on how that's going to be progressed. And I've certainly, with my parish councils, said that necessary work to understand how that money is going to be spent, because you don't want to be wasting it on procedure and practice when, you know, if you've got a good strategy for how to spend that money, that makes perfect sense. But that decision can't come soon enough. And so I really welcome that moving along. And while we're on the subject of planning, I appreciate Councillor Harvey's not too well, so probably get a written answer. When it comes to performance, again, my colleagues and I are getting increasingly frustrated with the delays that are in the planning system. Now, we know that that is due to pressures on the workforce, and they're working as fast as they can. We know that. But in terms of performance, I think it would really help our understanding if we knew how many applications that there are that haven't been allocated, what the backlog is, how many applications have gone beyond the 8 or 13 weeks, just so we can manage our expectations and also have some understanding of how many officers we are missing and what the recruitment is going to be to bolster the numbers, so that we're not putting too much pressure on the valuable resource we've got and overloading them, and moving forward with greater capacity. So those are our concerns, and I appreciate you might not be able to give those answers categorically today, but that's the type of performance statistic that we really need so that we can get our heads around where we are with the planning system. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll to respond to that, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Lester. And you know, I'm wanting to dig into the detail of monthly performance. The kind of performance metrics that are reported to me as a cabinet member show a 2-year rolling average, which smears everything out and makes it very difficult to understand the lumpiness that we're facing at the moment. Through COVID, there has been a significant backlog develop in terms of planning applications, and it's really important that we get those moving, because planning and the the minor building works that go on, as well as big planning applications, are important to our local economy. There are lots of businesses that depend on that, and other businesses that depend on the salaries and the contracts that work generates in cascading through our economy. we have, I believe, and I think maybe Mr. Taylor will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that we have already tendered for work to be undertaken to deal with the bulge by outside consultants who will, act as our planners would do, but will provide additional resource in order to be able to deal with that bulge, so it isn't providing a perpetual pressure on the planning team. So we're effectively going to take that bulge and put it out to contract, and that will mean that backlog is dealt with. And I would like to ask anyone who's got an application that's stuck in the system somewhere, please to bear with us, because we are almost at the point where we're going to be able to contract out that work and get it sorted. So we'll deal with that bulge in one hit, and then the planning area generally is overdue a bit of transformational change work. We've got excellent officers who do a fantastic job. They know the county like the back of their hand. The reason that many of you are seeing planning applications that are unallocated to case officers is because our North and South team managers are holding back those cases so that our officers are not overburdened with caseloads that make it very difficult for them to manage. There's only so many cases that even an excellent case officer can handle at one time. They're all slightly different. They've all got their own little interests and wrinkles and difficulties. So the consultations are going on the normal time frame. People are being advised to submit their comments through the planning portal, and those comments are being collated along with the application information in the online visible system, and they will be allocated to case officers when case officers have the spare capacity to be able to undertake that. In parallel with that, we have a draft plan, which I believe is in development at the moment. I'm emailing Mr. Taylor weekly and more frequently than that, saying, when can we get together and talk about what that looks like? And hopefully we'll be able to put some additional resource and make some changes to the ways that we do things to improve the way that we do planning in Herefordshire for the future. And, looking outside, take good examples from other authorities who have already tried and tested improved ways of doing things. So we look to learn from our colleagues elsewhere. So bear with us. We're almost there. We're not quite there yet.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Any further questions, Councillor Lester?
No, but I think I accept all of the points that have been raised there, and I note the strategy to deal with the bulge, which I think is a good thing because it doesn't put undue pressure on officers doing their existing jobs. That makes perfect sense. But I do think in terms of performance, it will help us understand planning a lot better if we have more performance reports, whether they're in this performance area or whether it goes to planning committee. I don't know. I'll leave that to the administration. But I think a greater picture of how planning is performing will be helpful to all.
Thank you. Move on then to Councillor Wilding.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Councillor Wilding has had a power cut, so he's having a chocolate biscuit, trying to come on board. But I told him to have a chocolate biscuit anyway.
Right. Well, I think we'll take this recommendation then, if I may. So the recommendation. So the recommendation is as follows: that a Cabinet review the performance of financial forecasts for 21-22 as set out in Appendices A to F and has not identified any additional actions to be considered to achieve future improvements. I think that's a true reflection of the discussion. obviously some work is being done in the area of planning. So I've got that recommendation to the Cabinet. All those in favour? Thank you. So final item is the annual review of earmarked reserves, the notice review reserves held by the council. This item begins on page 91 of the agenda pack. And again, probably a brief introduction from Councillor Harvey and then over to Mr. Lovegrove.
Yes, we need. This is something that we need to do to publish what the reserves are looking like. I've asked officers to do a little bit of work to rationalise those, to pull together some of the little itty bitty pots of money, and to also get it organised on the page. So hopefully it makes a little bit more sense, and you can see where those reserves are owned and what they're actually there for. So I'm very happy to receive feedback on the improvements that we've made. I'm sure we can also improve it still further. But over to Mr. Lovegrove to talk about the content of the report in detail.
Thank you, Leader. All I was going to bring the Cabinet's attention on Appendix A, which is on a page showing where we are in reserves. We did have a bulge, if that's the right phrase, at the end of March this year. And that was predominantly because of the COVID monies that we were holding on behalf of the government. And that money will be spent all this year. So as you can see, we have £23.8 million at the end of March, but that will be deployed this year.
Okay. Any Cabinet members wish to comment, or shall I go straight to group leaders? All right, I see no hands, so we'll go straight to group leaders. I don't know where to start. My practice has been to go alphabetically, but to move down the list. So I'll start this time with Councillor Wilding, and then I'll go to Councillor Fagan, James, Lester, Matthews.
Councillor Wilding will be having a discussion.
So Councillor Fagan.
Leader, yeah, we've just noted this the reserve, and actually, to be honest, I don't have any comment on it. I mean, I'm grateful to Mr. Lovegrove for the bulge in terms of the COVID grants. I mean, obviously that they've been really important to people of Herefordshire in such a difficult time. And just note the report. Thank you.
So Councillor James and then Councillor Lester.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing really to add. I just made a comment upon the use of the term reserves, when sometimes they're not they are questionable whether they are reserves if they're already allocated. They're temporary reserves as such. One tends to look upon in business sector as reserves unallocated as opposed to allocated. That's all.
Okay. Councillor Lester.
Yes, thank you. Just a question for Mr. Lovegrove. We note that he's happy with the level of reserves, and that's to be noted. And we as a group acknowledge that. But just a question, and it came up at scrutiny when we were talking about how the council has dealt with the situation with its response to COVID. Are we confident, Mr. Lovegrove, that all of the reserves we hold that is set aside to deal with the COVID situation, we're still plugging to members of the public, and in terms of rate relief and grants, that money's still there to assist them?
Yes, I can assure Councillor Lester that every penny we are making sure is allocated out. We still get additional grants for COVID items. We've probably seen in the press today that the government announced a further scheme to help fund families who are facing challenges. We haven't had any details yet as the council, but the normal process will be that we're given an allocation of money, which we'll put into the reserve, and then follow the government guidance to distribute that grant. So yes, everything has been done to get that money out to people.
Thank you, Councillor Lovegrove. Sorry, Mr. Lovegrove. Moving on then to Councillor Matthews. Councillor Matthews, are you available?
He's not here, Leader.
Okay, so right, well, thank you very much. That means we'll go to the recommendation, and the recommendation is that the reserves position detailed in Appendix A be noted. All those in favour? Thank you very much. And that, I think, brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you to everybody for attending. The next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, the 28th of October. Please can I have confirmation that the live stream has stopped?